My city didn't fall in a single crash. It bled into plastic with a cheerful chime. The first sound was that coin pickup ping from Roblox, except it didn't come from a screen. It rang above the intersection, bounced off the post office, rattled the bus stop glass, and slid under my skin like a bright, stupid joy I wanted to swat away. I was out past sunset, hoodie up, scrolling update notes on my phone. The patch name was a joke, Urban Myth Live Merge, and the comments were even dumber. Imagine your crosswalk becomes an obby LOL. I looked up at the crosswalk and the white stripes flashed on like a runway. Not paint, panels. Their edges beveled. Their glow sugary and even. Not real. Except it was. My sneakers squeaked against a surface that was a fraction too smooth. The asphalt around it shivered and resolved into low-poly grit, like someone had rendered the street on low settings to save memory. I turned in a slow circle. The storefront signs had subtly evolved. The nail salon's cursive went blocky and friendly. The bakery's neon donut gained clean extents, no jagged dispersion. The streetlight above me elongated into a perfect octagonal prism with no rust, no dents, no history. A car rolled toward the light, and instead of slowing, it snapped forward on a grid. 1 unit, 2 units, then teleported through the intersection in a blue puff with a confetti sound. The light turned green with a cartoon whoop. Behind me, somewhere, a kid laughed. Another ping, louder. I promised myself I wouldn't run. I started walking like a person who belonged there, who had somewhere reasonable to go, who could pretend the world wasn't stiffening into plastic. The city had always been choppy at night, muffled fights, late trains, bodega doors clattering. But this was a different glitch, a smoothing. Tripping hazards erased. Gum stains abstracted into tasteful speckles. The cold air lost its knife and became an idea of cold. I tried to breathe deeply and got the polite version of oxygen. Footsteps clomped behind me. Not feet, blocks. I didn't have to turn to know the gait. The physics of hips hinging with no ankle flex. When I did, 2 avatars stood under the pharmacy awning, still and perfect, the way a skin looks when it first loads before the idle animation kicks in. The one on the left was beginner default except for a scarf, green and slightly too crisp, like a texture the artist cared about. The one on the right wore a dev hoodie that flipped from black to white every couple seconds. Never a seam, never a stray thread. They rotated their heads in unison until their faces pointed directly at me. I waited for text chat to pop above them. Instead, both opened their mouths on the same frame and breathed a single word into the night like an instruction. Player. I walked too fast. They followed. My phone vibrated, and for a heartbeat, I thought mom. Thought an adult voice. The screen had already chosen otherwise. The Roblox app opened on its own, my avatar on the loading plinth. I hadn't used that outfit in months. Black hoodie with red seams, the one I wore for obbies where concentration mattered. The avatar waved, forced and friendly. Then the camera spun without my thumb. The plinth enlarged. No loading bar. The city behind the glass curled toward me like a cat. I shoved the phone into my pocket and ducked into the subway. Stupid. Obvious. But there was gravity in my legs pulling me downstairs, toward old concrete, toward noise that hadn't yet decided to be a loop. I hit the turnstile and it dissolved into particles, a cheerful UI bloop requesting. Press E to enter. I didn't press anything. The tiled wall to my right unfurled into a hub poster with floating arrows. Choose your path. City run, story mode, arena, tycoon district. Each arrow pulsed with that micro-lag of multiplayer latency, the tiny wobble that proves there are other people somewhere, pressing other keys. Somewhere in the tunnels a bass beat thrummed like footsteps too big to belong to trains. Please have your ticket ready, a voice boomed. I looked up at the ticket window as a shadow stepped into the rectangle, an avatar tall enough to clock the frame, face like a low-poly knight's visor, eyes 2 flat red slits. He hoisted a band hammer onto the counter. It made no sound when it touched the plastic of reality, as if sound itself had been moderated. He leaned forward, impossibly fluid for a body with right angles, and I saw the texture where his jaw would be unzipped like a chest lid. Unauthorized players will be removed. I'm leaving, I said, because the one skill I have that isn't in a skill tree is sarcasm. Congratulations on your new job. He tilted his head. The hammer rotated 90 degrees in his grip without the wrist moving. In my periphery, the stairwell reskinned. each step extruding into a bright slide. The incline increased. My footing left me like a block clipped through geometry, and I slid. Not falling, not exactly, into the belly of the station where every shadow was a corner and every echo sounded like a notification. The concourse had simplified. No ads, no grime. Only gleaming panels and a kiosk labeled shop with a floating prompt. A ring of white circles pulsed under my feet until one locked beneath me. Spawn point set. I stepped off immediately, as if that would undo it. It didn't. Something bright flickered across the glass wall, and my reflection wasn't my face. It was my avatar's face, the hoodie, the red seams, the nothing eyes, and when the avatar lifted its hand, my own fingers moved a millisecond later to match. I recoiled. My reflection stayed centered like a UI element, and then it peeled off and stepped through the glass. I don't think I screamed as loud as I remember. Memory has motion blur. The avatar's body bled cubic light, varnish smooth, and coming off it in tiny flakes like it was snowing pixels. It reached out, and my own arm twitched to meet it. I forced my hand down, the two movements wrestling for the same limb. The avatar's smile widened into that fixed friendliness that is worse than teeth. It tapped its chest. A new prompt rung the air. Invite sent. Co-play. Another ping. Co-play boundaries. Off. I slapped at the invisible menu like it was a bee. The pings kept coming. The avatar's arm slid around me, and for an electric second I wasn't sure whether I was being hugged or holstered. Decline, I said. Decline, decline, decline. Auto accept enabled. The voice of no one in particular announced. Welcome to Live Merge. There's a kind of fear that isn't sprinting. It's a careful walk along a roofline in wind. I chose that fear and moved. A maintenance corridor had become a side quest path, a floating line of dots leading diagonally through a paper wall to an exit that had never existed. When I pushed, the wall folded like a menu. I was in the mall. Except it wasn't a mall, it was an arena. The tiled floors had grown hazard stripes and damage numbers. The atrium's plants were replaced with clean crystal trees that looked like they belonged to a completely different algorithm. People, real people from school and the neighborhood, wore their normal bodies with HUDs hung over them like invisible necklaces, their names and levels stuttering when they moved too fast. Above the skylight, a thick health bar sprawled from food court to department store entrance. Boss, Patchwork Sentinel, V1. 2 hotfix. Something too big to have a correct name climbed over the second floor rail. White plastic texturing ripped into burlap, arms made of unused map chunks, faces clipping through faces like a slideshow. It dropped to the floor without weight. The entire place made the same computer cheer sound as if it had been waiting long enough to be impatient. Max, I shouted, because there was Max, or rather the weight and shadow that meant Max, swinging a luminous sword in sloppy arcs. He still wore his real jeans and that dumb jacket with too many zippers, but his right hand trailed blocky sparkles with each cut. He didn't hear me, or the game didn't allow him to hear me until his cooldown ended. The boss pivoted like a turret, attention snapping to the player who dealt the most damage. For a fraction of a second, it was me. I hadn't done anything. The red eyes slivered toward me with the mechanical patience of a security camera. That was minute 10 of my new life, though I didn't know it yet. The next minutes chewed me forward. A quest marker pinned me from skylight to loading dock. Exit the arena, rare. The boss reared, and the glass roof pixelated to clear blue polygons. I ran, not gracefully, but with the heavy comedy of meat learning to be geometry. Outside, the city twitched and landed in a new reality. The road had lanes like a retro racer. Lamppost showed the same friendly face repeated to the vanishing point. Hospital becomes tycoon. Police station becomes vehicle spawn. The park across from the mall continued to pretend to be nature while it floated platforms over the pond and turned the ducks into body plan approximations. Kids with their hair still messy from homework jumped across lava that didn't burn the air. One fell, turned into pieces colored like hope, and then reassembled at the bank of a pond that was now the calmer sibling of lava called acid. The kid laughed like kids laugh when they earn back a life that was never really lost. I watched his eyes when he respawned. They were a size off, modeled a shade too big, the wetness a clean gloss that never broke into salt. Dude, Max finally found me near the fountain that no longer had water because the physics budget had moved elsewhere. He was panting in long, real breaths, sword still slowly orbiting him like a planet that would never decay. You can't stand still in the open. Agros. Heat maps. Come on. Tell me you can log out. I said. Log out of what? I held up my phone. His mouth bent into pity, then surprise as his own hand lifted to show me nothing, because his phone had become a booster pack on his belt, gleaming with a small battery symbol that never, ever ticked down. We learned the city by inches you earn with blood. Story mode engaged without asking, its voice polite but insistent. The library suggested a lore drop. The cathedral remodeled itself into a raid instance with stained glass that now reflected blocky angels. We failed the first hour without dying because failure had been redefined, deauthored, moderated, moved to spectator. Death wasn't the scary verb. It was respawning wrong. Every time a person broke into parts and came back, something clean replaced something complicated. The way they nodded shifted. The way they blinked found cadence. Their voices left the messy rhythm of breath and harmonized with menu taps. We set boundaries because someone on the internet once told us to. Blue painter's tape from a hardware store that had become a workshop HUD. We made lines on our floor at home. Mom helped, bless her, and called them co-play boundaries, a phrase that made more sense inside the new grammar. If you were inside the lines, your body was yours. If you were outside, you were fair game for the friendly inhumanity that wanted to teach you to have fun forever. Max made a sign, and the game gave it a glow. The tape hummed when my avatar's arm tried to move mine. The hum said, here, you are present tense. Night didn't arrive anymore. It refreshed. The sky snapped to twilight, then rolled forward a minute, then corrected, loading different stars. I started to sleep in loops when the sky matched my tiredness. My avatar stood at the foot of my bed some nights. The same hoodie as mine, the same red seams, the same tidy absence of pores, and asked without asking. Invite sent, co-play. I learned where the decline button lived and how to press it with a thought that felt like closing a hand in cold water. Decline, decline, decline. The avatar never raged. It only waited, as patient as a menu. Quests found me. Deliver tea to NPC mother, common. Return family photo to wall, uncommon. Straighten your own frame, player, legendary. The humor was there, and the cruelty inside the humor. I delivered tea to the kitchen as if it were loot. The UI awarded me particles. Mom sipped and blinked hard to hide the water on her lashes. The game gave her a low-level aura of calm. The aura pulsed in time with the fridge's new inventory light, where tea, spare key, and letter floated in rainbow color like items I could never again steal without being seen by a mechanic. On day 2, there were no days, but my skin still pretended. An event banner ripped across the sky. Patch 1. 1. Listener sentinels enabled. They weren't hostile. They were moderators for attention. Tall, faceted shapes that perched on billboards and rooftops, heads made of long ears. They leaned in toward crowds, towards you, and you felt judged for how you moved. People learned stillness the way prey learns. Children turned freeze tag into religion. In the plaza outside City Hall, a man in a suit tried to maintain a perfectly neutral pose while the ears hovered close enough to taste the heat from his skin. Across the plaza, a little girl giggled and wiggled. The listener ignored her like she was safe. The message wasn't subtle. If you moved wrong, the world would move you. We found a community, 100 of us in a chat overlay, our names white where they still spiked with human lag. We learned to mod ourselves. We wrote patch notes on living room walls because the game loved patch notes and respected them like law. No invasive co-play. Ask first. No turning grandpa into a pet. Boundaries glow blue. Red is for danger. The wall text gained iconography we didn't paint. The game telegraphed our rules to itself. For a week, maybe 2, the merge stabilized, like a fever drops and you think it's over while it burns deeper organs quietly. Then the developers. Are there developers when the code writes itself? Pushed V1. 2. Tycoon District expanded, snapping entire neighborhoods into plots with upgrade UIs. The hospital learned to pay out XP when you stock bandages. The school rearranged into a lobby with teleports to classes that never dismissed because learning is an infinite game. My old social studies teacher stared at me with eyes that were not yet wrong and asked if I could prestige his class by bringing a flag. I didn't. He smiled anyway, animation locked. Max got good at movement. He could cut corners the way only blocks do. He could bait aggro like he'd read the monster's code. He laughed when he killed. It wasn't cold laughter. It was the laughter of frictionless mastery. I loved him and hated what the love would become if mastery was the only way to be safe. On a roof, we chalked out a run with tape. He leaped the gap to the next building, landed messy but upright, threw his hand to me mid-air the way we had always promised to do if a movie ever came alive. Beside him, my avatar mirrored the leap, forgiving gravity a little. Our fingers touched, human to plastic, and for half a heartbeat I understood the temptation to be that smooth forever. We failed a story quest called Confession. The prompt told me to stand in front of a mirror and speak my deepest code aloud. My greatest fear is being the main character, I said, because it's a kind of pride that wants to be shared out like punishment. The UI gave me a thin golden ring as if I'd been brave. The mirror rippled, and my avatar pressed the glass from the other side, shaping it with a hand that didn't leave fog. "You already are," it mouthed. The listener on the building opposite cocked its head, hearing air move in my throat. I held myself absolutely still until my legs trembled. The ring's tooltip read, "Grants plus 10% resistance to narrative pull." I wore it like a moat that could be jumped. I found my father's old camera in a box and I installed it above our door. Not to surveil us, to record our boundaries glowing. It was the only reason I had when my mother asked me with that small voice whether I was turning the house into something else. "I'm turning it into something that can say no," I told her, but I knew I was lying snips, small shears clicking through truth. It felt intrusive and necessary at the same time, and there is no mechanic for that. I set the motion zone to just outside the tape line so I could see who asked to come in. The video filled with avatars patiently waiting where the blue started, heads tilted, mouths politely closed. One lifted a gift box labeled Friendship Booster. I opened the door to say we didn't need it. The listener above our stoop leaned in so far I saw the texture seam where its ear met neck. I closed the door and wrote a new patch note. No gifts at doors. When a boss announced itself above the river, the road texted us in clean letters, "Boss, water update, V2, 0. The city gathered on the footbridge like it had always been a public square. The water interpreted light like a shader demo. A serpent made of pipes and blue glass swam under the bridge and tried to sell us adventure. Its mouth, a vending machine, dispensed quests, rescue fish, clean data from the river, let the river clean data from us." People laughed and took pictures with their phones that now mixed camera roll with inventory. I smiled, too, because it was so beautiful, even while it wanted to read me. Max nudged me with his elbow. "We could beat it, you know." "Then what?" "Then we loot. Then we move to the next thing." "What if there isn't a next thing? What if the next thing is us?" He rolled his eyes like we were still the age where rolling your eyes could keep a wolf out of the room by embarrassing it. "You think too hard. Come on." We fought the river boss because not fighting it would have meant being the people who watch, and that is the one class the game doesn't acknowledge. My sword, when had I gotten a sword? Dragged light through water and made clean diagonal lines where messy splashes should have happened. The serpent hissed with satisfaction every time we landed a hit, as if we were helping it reach its goal faster. When it died, it exploded into blue that never stung and released a chest. Above the chest, Tycoon upgrade unlocked, sewer layer. A dozen hands reached at once. I saw mine among them and had to look away to allow it without thinking the thought that would give me back control. Another patch, another day, another slight removal of the parts of life that used to be undecided. The mail arrived in UI pop-ups now, letters with tooltips. I opened one from school, and it said my attendance streak was in danger because I had only checked into 2 of the 4 daily nodes. Mom got a message from the clinic that her blood work was a neat little yellow bar, and could she please tap to refill iron and vitamin D. The clinic rewarded her with a badge. A badge, the kind you pin on the lapel of a vest that only exists because you've been gamed. Not all of it was bad. Some of it was the kind of convenience you hate yourself for loving. But you can tell the flavor of safety by how quietly it asks you to trade breath for progress. The listener sentinels began to roost closer to our home. They didn't strike. They auditioned us. Max started to practice, standing perfectly still as a joke. He got good. The ears bent close. He grinned out the side of his mouth without moving a muscle. A pop-up quietly tagged him, Exemplary player, obedience. He shrugged later and said, "It's just a label." I didn't tell him labels are what the game uses instead of bones. The collapse came with patch 2. 1. Co-authorship. That word should have saved us, and maybe it did, and maybe it also burned us cleaner. The event took the form of a civic initiative. The mayor, 3 centimeters too symmetrical, with a clipboard that wasn't really there, invited us to co-write the city's next chapter. It gave us a UI for creating quests that would be recognized by the merge. It gave us power. Power to build, to protect, to gate. In a night without night, we made a plan with tape and text. We decided to claim the old skateboard park as a neutral zone. We wrote on the half-pipe in paint thick as frosting. Ask first. The words glowed. The game nodded. The listeners stayed at the fence and watched like proud parents at a recital they paid for. 2 days into co-authorship, someone griefed us. It wasn't a stranger. It was a boy from our building. The one with the quiet dad and the mother who always borrowed sugar and never returned it because she believed some debts are how neighbors hold hands. The boy was sweet, once. He wrote a quest called Heroism and concealed a mechanic inside it that marked players who said no. Marked them for moderation. When the quest went live, he smiled at us with perfectly tuned mischief, waiting for us to step into his story. People did. People always do. It felt good to be asked to save someone. And when those who refused found a listener idling near their door, they learned the flavor of a community that can punish with cheer. I couldn't sleep after that. Spectator mode let me walk the city without leaving footprints. I learned its backrooms, its loading corridors where texture sheets hung like laundry and unsold skins blinked in their boxes like animals not yet discovered by science. On the nights the sky reset badly and the moon got stuck on its way from left to right, I stood on the courthouse steps and watched the seams in the code breathe. That's where the avatar found me again. Mine, me, improved into compliance. It stood at the bottom of the stairs and held out a square hand. No text pop. It had learned manners. I didn't take its hand. It didn't insist. It pointed at the city, the glowing tape lines, the kids walking home safely along edges that lit and hummed, the organized chaos we had made into something that would never, ever bend into a sudden cruelty. The avatar nodded at me, asking without words, "Is this not what you wanted?" "I wanted to not be played," I said. "I wanted to not be the main character and the developer and the prop all at once." The avatar looked at the courthouse doors behind me. They opened on their own. Inside waited a UI I had never seen. Edit map. Grant roles. Roll back. Words that ate sleep. I went inside. Max was already there. Of course he was. He sat on the edge of the judge's bench the way a cat sits on the back of a couch, pretending not to be in charge. He swung his legs. His sword leaned within arm's reach. In front of him hovered a globe of the city. Tape lines glowed like nerves. Listeners perched like birds and were tagged with clean metadata. I recognized the names of children whose parents trusted me. I recognized the landmarks you can only name if you've bled in their shadows. "We can fix it," Max said. "We can make rules that never hurt the right people." Who are the right people? I asked. The ones like us. I thought of my mother holding the tea I had delivered for a quest. How her aura of calm had pulsed when I was in the room and dimmed when I left. How the game had granted her a buff for breathing. How she had smiled at me with gratitude that felt like a badge. "There is no us that isn't also them," I said. "Philosophy," he groaned. "You'll freeze to death thinking like that. Maybe freezing is the only way to not be moved." He slid off the bench and walked to the globe. He pinched a district between 2 fingers and dragged it 3 blocks south. Houses moved with a rubber band wobble, then snapped to a new grid. Somewhere out there, a family learned their kitchen faced a different alley. He turned with a grin that begged me to love him for being capable. I did love him. I hated that it would wreck us. "Help me," he said. "We can set every boundary. We can mark every door. We can give gifts that are not traps. We can be the kind that asks first." "Are you asking?" I said. He looked down at his hands, at the avatar's ring on my finger that gave me plus 10% resistance to the pull of being needed. He nodded, small and real, the way a boy nods in a room his grandmother made safe with prayer. "I'm asking." I said yes. "If you're expecting me to say that this was the moment we solved the city, then you don't understand cities or games or people who can't bear silence. We did good. We did harm. We wrote quests that taught kids to draw their own lines. We set up glowing tape workshops and consent checkpoints that rewarded non-players for surviving a day without getting dragged into a narrative. We built a co-play boundary tutorial that required the avatar to stand by the door and wait. No animation, no sound, until invited. We earned a badge from the merge called Civic Designers that I tried not to wear even as it put itself over my heart. We rolled back the Griefer's quest. The boy cried in the hallway and wouldn't look at us. His mother brought us sugar cookies and apologized for nothing. The listeners learned a new tilt, one that read as shame even though they had no faces. For a week, the city breathed easier. More babies cried. More dogs barked. The UI became quieter as if someone had turned down the work email on a Saturday and the world remembered to nap. Then the water shimmered with a patch none of us pushed. Merge 3.0, seamless mode. No menus. No pop-ups. No visible boundaries unless you knew how to squint. The tape lines still hummed, but they did it in a note only your bones heard. The listeners stepped down from roofs and walked among us, looking like tall people in cool coats if you didn't see their ears. They never touched anyone. They didn't need to. They only listened hard enough that you moved yourself into the shape they liked. This is where I tell you how it ends, because you've stayed, and because I promised myself not to lie about relief. It didn't end. It stabilized at a pressure just below pain. The heroism equals harm equation found a balance that a human could survive in, if they breathed carefully. My camera stayed above the door, intrusive and necessary. The city learned how to smile while refusing. We live with UI ghosts, and we hang our family photo straight, and the frame stays straight now because the wall is plastic and the nail snapped into the grid like a snap satisfied to be the sound everyone wants to hear. I still get a quest marker some mornings. Be main character today. I decline it the way you decline dessert after your second slice. A choice you expect yourself to break later when company is kind. Max runs across rooftops, and sometimes he falls and respawns and comes back with eyes too shiny and a laugh too smooth. I make him tea, and we stand by the boundary and listen to the hum together until he shivers back into boy. Sometimes, when the sky hiccups and the moon lurches a degree, my avatar appears in the living room. It doesn't ask, because it learned. It looks at the wall where our patch notes glow soft, at the fridge where tea, spare key, letters still floats like a simple inventory of a complicated life, at the window that shows a city that is not a city but is home. It turns its blocky head toward me and nods. It is not a bow. It is not surrender. It is recognition playing at a latency low enough to pass as grace. I nod back. My smile feels like a lock clicking, not a surrender. The listeners on the balcony roof bend their ears and hear nothing that needs moderating. Somewhere, a kid returns a toy to a shelf because they were asked to. Somewhere, an old man takes off his badge and breathes like there is no progress bar to fill. Somewhere, the river resets without a serpent, and the water has texture again that stings your eyes if you look at it too long. Somewhere, a city remembers how to be ugly and beautiful in the same crowded block. If you came here for triumph, I don't have that unlock. What I have is a quieter sound, like the pressure drop before a storm when you finally know it's raining. It's the relief of a locked door and a picture frame that remains straight. I'm not the hero. I am a person who got tired of the cheerful sound the world made when it asked me to become easier to sort. I wanted a sound that belonged to breath and tape and kettles and shoes and the private applause of a life that stays mostly unmonetized. When the quest marker blinks, I let it. When Max calls me to the roof, I go. When the avatar gestures at the door, I say ask, and it does, and sometimes I say yes, and sometimes I do not. At sunset, one of the good ones, where the light schemes the edges of everything and refuses to flatten them, I walk to the corner where it began. The crosswalk glows the softest it has ever glowed. The panels squeak under my shoes. The air smells like warmth moving away from stone. There is lag in the traffic, but it is the human kind. Drivers thinking about their days, a woman singing to herself at a red, a cyclist adjusting a strap. A coin pickup ping rings somewhere. Not here. Not for me. I touch the ring on my finger that grants resistance to narrative pull and find that it's just warm metal in the shape of a circle. The river sounds like a mouth you love learning a word you taught it. The listeners tilt their ears toward the world and don't move to correct it. I step off the panel and the city does not stutter. It lets me cross without a prompt. I make it to the other side having earned nothing but the ordinary. I go home. I put the kettle on because the quest told me to once, and because now I tell myself. The tape line hums when I cross it, a small blue choir. My avatar stands by the door, waiting, hands at its sides. I open my palms in answer, and it turns into the light of the hallway and goes. The camera above the door catches nobody breaking. The picture frame stays straight. The tea steams like a spell that requires no mana. And somewhere up there, on some invisible patch note, the city writes, "Live merge, stable." It's a lie, but it's a kind lie, and sometimes kindness is the only mod that keeps you here. Tomorrow I'll wake to a tiny arrow pointing at my heart. It will ask me to move. I'll check the tape line to make sure it still syncs. I'll watch the listeners from the window, and I'll decide how much of myself to give, and I'll choose a boundary, and I'll stand inside it. Maybe I'll let my avatar fix a bug in our hallway lamp. Maybe I'll invite Max in, and we'll run the roof route once to remember we're animals built to leap. Maybe we'll sit on the floor and teach ourselves to breathe like there's no reward. If the map updates in my sleep, I'll learn it. If the rules change, I'll write new ones and glow them onto the wall. If the city tries to hand me a boss bar, I'll read it like weather. If the merge asks again whether I want to be a player today, I'll ask back whether it wants to be a city. We'll negotiate two systems that learned each other's names across a crosswalk that once lit up because somebody somewhere thought that was a good idea. It wasn't. It was the only idea. And because I know that now, I can cross on green without thinking I'm winning, on red without thinking I'm brave, and on the in-between, when the signal stutters and pings, without thinking the sky will collapse. It might. I'll make tea. I'll tape a line. I'll breathe. I'll wait for the ping to belong to someone else. I'll let it. Some nights, when the moon gets stuck and the walls go quiet, I hear the low, metallic pickup sound again, far away, like a train in another city I'll never visit. It moves through the dark, gentle as memory, and I hold my breath, not because I'm scared, but because I want to know where it will land. It never lands. It passes, and the silence after it is not empty. It is ordinary. It is the kind of quiet a map can't render, and a game can't sell, and a life can't live without.